So welcome again to the South Bay COG's 23rd General Assembly, especially to those joining us for the afternoon session. I'm John Cruikshank, Chair of the South Bay COG and Mayor Pro Tem in the city of Rancho Palos Verdes. I'd like to introduce Kevin Cody, owner and publisher of the Easy Reader newspaper. Kevin will be moderating our next panel, which is entitled Powering the South Bay. Kevin?
I'm personally looking forward to these next four speakers, and after listening to the motivational speech by Gene Rodriguez, asking us not just to leave here feeling entertained and educated, but also leave here with the intent of doing something to address the energy issue. I think these four speakers will give us the background we need to do that. The title is South Bay Power. And the first speaker is Dr. Lorenzo Kristov. He's the independent energy policy expert, and his presentation is going to address one of Mr. Rodriguez's primary issues, which is diversity and resiliency in the power grid.
Hey, good afternoon. Good to see everyone, and thank you, South Bay City's Council of Governments, for inviting me to speak here. I guess, this is the clicker. Huh? There we go. So I was absolutely delighted to hear Gene Rodriguez's talk this morning, because he's talking about some of the important themes that I've also talked about in my work. I've worked with some of his colleagues at the Department of Energy. And so things like grid modernization and grid architecture, things that came up, are things that I've been involved with, working with some DOE people, with some national labs people, and so on. But what I want to emphasize today is really the bottom-up nature of the energy revolution that's happening. And bottom-up means, in particular, the role of cities, local governments, community organizations, neighborhoods in being part of the participatory new grid network that we want to build. So I titled this talk, Cities Can Lead the Way to a Decentralized Clean Energy Future, because I think really that leadership at the local level is what's going to make the difference. So context, urgent 21st century mandates. These were things that we didn't really have to think about in the 20th century as we were building the grid. Sustainability, which I basically define as stop making things worse. We know that our energy practices have caused a lot of the climate disruption. We've got to change, but that's going to take a while, a slow process to convert off of fossil fuels and start to use methods that don't damage the environment. Second, resilience. And that is about recovering from major disruptions or being able to avoid them. And that means the damage that's already been done. If we stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow, we've set in motion climate and ecosystem disruption that's going to play out over the next couple of decades, and we need to prepare for that. And the third, energy justice, centering environmental, social, and economic justice, which is a crucial factor in neighborhood health. And I think because of the way electricity has been delivered, a big supply system, utility scale resources, the bulk power system, coming one way down the wires with consumers flipping switches at the other end, we've tended to think of electricity as a commodity. And I think it's time for a shift in our thinking about that. It's not simply a commodity with suppliers and consumers. It's really an essential factor in the health of a neighborhood and a community. And so if we think about it that way, then energy is being incorporated in local activities and economy become important. We want the benefits of clean energy to reach all communities. We want to mitigate historic harms and ensure a just transition. And that means that people who are involved in some of the sectors that have to be displaced because they're harmful don't get harmed as people being able to survive economically. All three of these goals require local solutions. And this may not be obvious, but that's why I want to emphasize it. Sustainability and decarbonization, when we think about the sources of emissions, it's the stuff that happens locally. It's how do we move people from where they live to where they work? How do we get around and move stuff? How do we get stuff delivered to us? And so it's really in the realm of urban planning and county planning that a lot of the decisions will be made that will affect carbon emissions. Now, up till now, planners deal with things like zoning and land use and building codes, development strategies. They deal with housing, and you heard about housing this morning with regard to population growth and water. How do we make housing affordable, more dense, transit-oriented, electrification of housing? So these are all things, mobility strategies, public spaces, habitat, urban greenery, et cetera. And then all cities and counties are doing climate action plans, and they do general plans. So all of this work, up until now, for the most part, city planners have not been that concerned with energy. Why? Because of this divide. The utility takes care of energy. The cities plan all of these other things. So part of the message here is how do we bring those together? How do we get energy planning more integrated into urban planning? Resilience is another issue that has to have a local dimension to it. And no matter how much we invest in making the grid more resistant or faster to recover from disasters, there will be times when the grid goes out. We can't foresee all the disasters that are going to happen. Climate disruptions are going to get more surprising, harder to predict, more severe, and that will mean that prudent planning for energy resilience requires some capabilities at the local level to keep electricity flowing to essential services. That means things that don't depend on the grid. The term microgrids is a general concept for that. It's the idea of a local energy system that can operate independent of the grid and continue to provide power. This, again, is going to be local solutions. And then finally, energy justice and equity, that also is local, because we know that there are neighborhoods that are more challenged or more vulnerable or have poorer infrastructure than other neighborhoods. And it's at the local level that we have to take the language and the aspirations of justice and make it real in terms of concrete outcomes. So where we're at is that local energy systems are essential for today's urgent needs, but existing policies create some major barriers, and I'll come back to that theme. So some possibilities. Here are some things, and if you saw the South Bay City's COG newsletter from earlier this month, I had a little article that lists out some of these things. But think about compensating individual customers to oversize their rooftop and battery systems so that they can provide energy to their neighbors. Right now, if you have net energy metering, well, typically your system is supposed to be limited to the size that you need to serve the needs of your house. Well, that doesn't make sense really from a planning perspective. We should be planning energy at a community level so that we preserve tree canopy where houses have shady roofs, don't cut the trees down, but oversize the solar on neighboring houses and be able to serve each other. Enable locally owned co-ops and businesses to actually own energy resources and sell electricity to their neighbors, to local businesses. This gets back to the idea of integrating energy into the local economy because it adds to economic health of the neighborhood and the community. Deploying municipal electrification projects. A lot of the assumptions of planners in the electricity field think that as we electrify more things, transportation, housing, buildings, et cetera, all of that power has to be served by the bulk power grid. Well, let's start thinking about how we can serve a lot of that need locally. For example, if a city wants to electrify a fleet of buses, well, maybe the bus stations that are going to provide the charging for those buses can have solar installations and stationary battery storage so that you're now using local resources to provide the energy that you need for an electrification project. Neighborhood resilience centers. This has now become a popular term in California, and there's actually a program at the Strategic Growth Council to fund neighborhood resilience centers. The idea being, take an existing facility, something like this, for example, that could take in hundreds of people if there's a power outage and it's maybe really cold or maybe really hot and they need shelter for a couple of days because the power system has gone out. These centers can operate as little microgrids, independent power supply, and they provide clean, renewable energy. And then on a year-round basis, of course, they cut their electricity bills because solar and battery storage are providing value 365 days a year. Building local energy planning capacity. Get back to a theme I mentioned a moment ago about urban planners, county planners not really traditionally having dealt with energy. But with funding coming down to fund local energy projects, we need the capability at the local level to integrate energy planning into the planning activities that cities do in the sense of community-based organizations and neighborhoods. How do they go after this grant money? How do they identify a project? How do they develop a proposal that they can submit for a grant? How do they fund and finance a project? There's a disconnect between the energy justice and local energy aspirations and the actual ability for the funding and those programs to get out. And so we need to build capacity at the local level. So local electric systems are needed, they're feasible, they're cost effective. We don't quite yet have the planning and policy frameworks to enable them. And you'll see this theme I come back to again because I want all of you to become advocates at the legislature to enable these kinds of things to happen, to enable the funding that's going to advance this capability. Here's just a quick example of a project that was funded by the California Energy Commission called EcoBlock. It's in Oakland. And the idea is the buildings with the blue roofs are basically created electrically connected to be a microgrid. So you take a contiguous urban residential block, all the buildings on that block are connected electrically, you put solar panels wherever you can have them, you might have centralized storage, you might have vehicle charging stations and shared vehicles, and a single point of interconnection to the grid so that if there's a grid outage, this block can continue to function and have electricity. The project is kind of stuck right now. They got money from the Energy Commission to build it, but it's been really challenging to get past some of the statutory and regulatory limitations that prevent this thing from being fully manifested. And so that's just another illustration of what I think is a brilliant idea, something that could be replicated in urban areas everywhere. But we need changes in the legislative level, in the statutory level, and at the regulatory level. This is one here's that my friends at the Energy Coalition, who had a booth in the next room this morning, have been working on. This is the Bassett Avocado Heights project. Also a number of innovative ideas of creating local energy capability, houses operating in coordination, et cetera. But you can look up community, I forget the term now, but you can look up the Bassett Avocado Heights and the Advanced Energy Community, that's the term. There's in the lower right, there's a website to look that up. So here again, projects that are getting funded as pilot projects at the state level by the Energy Commission, but are running into legislative and regulatory hurdles that prevent them from being completed and replicated. So at the same time, major industry trends are colliding with these legacy policies. Well, what I generally call distributed energy resources, and that's everything from rooftop solar and electric vehicles to front-of-the-meter installations, 2 or 3 or 4 megawatt installations of solar, say on the roof of a warehouse or a parking garage. These resources are becoming more flexible, scalable, cost-effective, and competing with the grid. For 100 years, if you wanted electricity, you had to buy it from the grid. That was where it came from. And it didn't really have competition. And for the first time now, any customer who has money can put on-site resources and completely meet their electricity needs through on-site resources and not be dependent on the grid. Well, that creates a problem in a way, because as the cost effectiveness and attractiveness of distributed resources increase, And at the same time, grid costs are increasing because of the need to build new infrastructure, replace old infrastructure. Then entities, parties, businesses, residences who have the money to invest in distributed resources can do it, but it has a chance of worsening the inequities in our energy systems because lower income people are not going to be able to do this. So we need a policy framework that really makes distributed resources accessible to everyone. The legacy 20th century policies, and this is something that Gene Rodriguez talked about this morning, as we thought about the grid that was created with 19th century engineering thinking and 20th century technologies, it's all about big infrastructure. It's all about building centralized power stations and transmission lines. So it hasn't, the mindset in the industry hasn't yet evolved to realize the bottom-up nature of the transformation that we're trying to accomplish. So some of the thinking needs to change, and that's an area that I work on a lot with conferences and presentations and working groups, et cetera. But the tendency is for the utilities, for the most part, to view distributed resources as a problem. They challenge the operating procedures, they challenge their revenue models, they challenge through their competitiveness the ability of parties to take load off of the grid. And so much of the regulatory thinking is about how do we manage this problem. My perspective is that distributed resources are the key to the future. We don't get to decarbonization, resilience, energy justice without really enabling the flourishing of distributed resources. So we need to change that mindset. Meanwhile, if we view the DERs as a problem, then we tend to view their behavior as chaotic. Customers are making their own decisions about investing. They're all going to come home at 6 p.m. and plug in their vehicles, and they'll all charge at the same time and overload the circuits. Well, that kind of planning leads to overinvestment in capacity because you're always investing in infrastructure to meet the worst case. And there again, we need in planning the ability to look at cases, thank you, to look at cases where we can actually coordinate the activity of distributed resources for grid benefits. So we need a new policy framework, maximize societal and grid benefits. So it's not only the benefits to the individual who invests in the DERs, but also the potential to provide services to the grid, provide benefits to make the grid more reliable, provide benefits to all of society by contributing to decarbonization and resilience. Encourage local ownership and operation of DERs. Allow them to be economic participants in this new participatory network because energy justice is not just about grants and low rates. It's getting beyond what I might call a charity model to one where communities are really empowered to be economic participants in the clean energy future. And that's what I think this grid of the future can do. So multiple mind shifts, I mentioned some of these already. The utility regulatory attitude, DERs are a problem. Shift to DERs are essential for meeting 21st century mandates. The market concept, viewing electricity as a commodity with a supply side and consumers, shift to electricity as a core determinant of neighborhood health and sustainability. The planning paradigm, a lot of our planning and in a way the way a lot of our economic thinking is about individual consumers, individual households, and we want to move the planning paradigm to more of a community level where we're optimizing energy along with things like housing and tree canopy, urban forests, mobility services, and integrating energy into those. It's not just about individuals and individual households. And then the value of energy justice communities, again, moving from this notion of seeing low-income communities or frontline communities, whatever term you want to use, instead of seeing them as needing special treatment and giving them grants, think about the rest of society needs them to be vital participants in the clean energy economy. They need to be producers of clean energy economically, and so that adds to the economic health of the neighborhood. And I think I'm close to the end, so I'll probably even stay within my time limit. So 3 policies. One is integrating energy planning into urban and county planning. And these, again, is part of a new way of thinking, but it's going to take some investment. develop state agency partnerships with local governments, tribes, and community-based organizations. The group that I worked with, a nonprofit called the Climate Center, sponsored last year a bill, Senate Bill 833, which was authored by Bill Dodd, which would have created a program under the California Energy Commission to provide funding and all sorts of technical expertise to local governments to be able to do energy resilience planning. That bill got almost to the end of the legislative session and then got killed. It may come back again, but the concept is still very, very vital that we need as a state to invest in that kind of planning at the bottom level. Adopt new regulations to allow local electricity transactions. This idea of limiting the size of your solar panels to meet the needs of your house. Let's allow local businesses to create energy locally and serve their local customers so that you're not just buying everything from power that's delivered from the bulk power system. Oversize on-site DERs, allow them to participate in the sales of power. And also, there's a potential benefit with local energy is that as we think about planning grid infrastructure, there's a lot of discussion about all of this new demand from electrification is going to require huge investment in grid infrastructure. Well, it's possible. And there are some organizations, third parties, that are experimenting with this now, that you get people that have rooftop solar and battery storage on a distribution circuit. You coordinate the activity of the battery storage, and you can flatten the load profile. And as you flatten the net load profile over that circuit, you reduce the peak. You reduce the need to build to expand the size of the infrastructure. You can accommodate more solar panel installations because you're not allowing the production to overload the circuit or overload the transformer. These are things that are technically feasible, but they're not commercially rewarded yet. And so that's, again, comes back to the regulatory arena. And then finally, reform the distribution utility as what I've called an open access DSO. And that's a mouthful, but DSO means basically distribution system operator. The idea is that we want to get to a participatory network where every customer has the ability to be a participant, producing and selling energy, providing grid services to support the operation of the grid and getting compensated for that. But then it means we need a distribution utility that's actually providing a network that allows for those interactions. And it does require some upgrading of how the distribution utility operates. It requires some investment in their operational capabilities, but I view this as really essential to create this transactive participatory distribution network, which then really enables distributed resources and local government entities to be commercially viable, not just reliant on grants, but actually they're in the business of producing energy. So finally, some strategies. Implement single property microgrids, and I know that many communities are interested in this already. I know that there are some programs with some of the CCAs. The Clean Power Alliance is one, East Bay Community Energy, working with their member jurisdictions to identify sites for community resilience centers and helping them through RFPs and contract management to implement these. But getting these things in place is a demonstration of what's possible. They provide immediate resilience benefits, immediate economic benefits by reducing power costs. Urge state agencies, especially the PUC and the CEC, to establish ongoing collaboration and communication with local government agencies and community-based organizations. For organizations on the ground working in communities, getting involved in regulatory proceedings is prohibitive. It's hugely costly. It's hugely complicated. If you don't have the capability of having the kind of expert staff that can engage in proceedings, you're shut out. And so that requires some reforms at the agency level. Lobby the state to invest in local energy planning capacity. This I mentioned earlier, but they need a push, and it would be great if they got that push from all of you, the folks who are in local government, saying, we really want to do this. We really want to be able to build local energy resources. Here's what we need to strengthen our capability in order to be able to do that successfully. Develop business and financing models for locally owned and operated DER projects and microgrids. There are some grant programs, but grants are always competitive, and there's never enough to meet the need. And we really want local projects to be commercially viable, financially viable, because they are participating economically in the system. So we need to develop new business and financing models to do that, build a statewide local government movement for statutory and regulatory reform to allow these local projects to serve local needs. And again, there's lots, as we delve into it, there's lots of regulations and statutes that really preserve the monopoly structure of the utility, which the utility serves a valid function and will continue to do so, but it needs to be opened in order to allow this bottom-up revolution to take place. And basically, if we can do these things, then we can deploy these distributed resources for greater local self-reliance. And I think as climate impacts get worse, the more we can depend locally on the things that we essentially need, just like with water, as we talked about this morning. Electricity is the same thing because everything depends on having energy. So it's building that self-reliance that we want to work towards. And I think that's the end. I put to be continued because this is just the start of a longer discussion. Thank you.
Our keynote speaker, in addition to talking about diversifying sources of energy, talked about making clean energy widely available, particularly to underprivileged communities. And that's what our next speaker does. Alex Turek is the Director of Strategic Development for the Grid Alternatives of Greater Los Angeles.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It smells good. This is going to be tough to do on an empty stomach. But yeah, appreciate Dr. Kristov's talk, and really appreciate you centering it on equity, access, and the importance of a just transition. And that's what I'm really going to be discussing today. The programs that are available today to help contribute to a just transition and how we might be able to work together here in the South Bay. So quick introduction to my organization, nonprofit Grid Alternatives. We were established with the recognition, like with most technologies, clean energy has an access problem. Even though working class communities, oftentimes communities of color, are disproportionately impacted by pollution and climate change, very relevant here in the South Bay. Even though these families have a far greater energy burden and spend far more on their utility bills, and a lot of these working class people don't have access to this really rapidly growing industry of well-paying, often union jobs. How can we ensure that we see a more equitable transition? There's so much opportunity as we go off of this, as been mentioned throughout the day, century-old energy infrastructure to a new system. How do we ensure that everyone is able to benefit from it, both financially, but also from a workforce development standpoint? And obviously it hits on so many things. We call it the triple bottom line. It addresses climate change, it addresses economic inequality, environmental justice, all at the same time. It reduces those energy burdens, accelerates our transition to clean energy, provides jobs. Thank you. This is kind of our mission. We build community-powered solutions to advance economic and environmental justice through energy, renewable energy. Here's kind of our footprint. We've installed over 17,000 systems over. Thank you. Got a grid fan in the audience. I love it. Talk to you after. Over 72 megawatts. You can see the lifetime savings, the participants trained, the climate impact that we've had. Here in the South Bay, here's kind of our map of solar installations. These are primarily income-qualified single-family homeowners that, like I said, experience some of the greatest energy burdens that are now, energy bills going from $150 to $20 a month. And imagine what these families can then do with these savings. I'm going to focus on some impact areas, and again, I want to focus on the programs that are readily available now that in partnership we can work on to bring to your communities, to your cities, and to the South Bay as a whole. The three I'm going to really focus on is solar, as well as solar and storage, the workforce development programs, and clean mobility opportunities. So the single-family installation, our single-family solar installation program is funded primarily by the state's DAC/SASH program. If you income qualify and you live in a specific census tract, you can receive no-cost solar from us. We administer this program. And so, we do, as the map showed, we do a lot of work in the South Bay. We install, we do everything in-house from the design, the site visit, to the installation and the interconnection. And in each step along the way, we're training folks. Again, trying to contribute to a more equitable workforce development of this kind of growing industry. We also do multifamily affordable housing installation, solar installations. Similar, there's a existing program with the state of California called the SOMA, Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing, a $1 billion program explicitly for solar at deed-restricted affordable housing. It's really a never-before-seen program. California's ahead in so many respects, and this is a really intentional investment for renters who face the greatest barriers to adoption of these technologies. Community solar, our biggest community solar footprint is in Colorado, but mostly because California's community solar policy landscape is new and to be honest, not designed in a way that really encourages development opportunities and equity. But we're always looking for opportunities to develop community solar. There are programs out there that we think could be workable, especially with a site host that is willing to share their property and rooftop for the system. Resilience centers, sorry about this font. Dr. Kristov mentioned this also. This is really becoming a focus of the state, and there are funding opportunities coming down the line for this. I think people are recognizing in the future and now, with increased wildfires, increased extreme heat days, increased stress on the grid, there's going to be more power shutoffs. And what do we do with especially with the at-risk folks who depend on consistent power? This photo is actually from Wilmington, right around the corner, at a senior center, at a Parks and Rec facility. What we don't see here is 3 battery packs, but this system is able to provide over 2 days of backup power for medical equipment, cell phone charging, air conditioning, lighting, and refrigeration of medicine. So this is really becoming a more important strategy by the state, and it's really just pairing solar with battery storage to provide backup power. Like Dr. Kristov mentioned, there's an upcoming Strategic Growth Council grant that we're really excited about. Workforce development's a major piece of our work. Like I said, every installation is a job training opportunity. So we have our signature IBT 200 program. This provides 13 weeks of hands-on, in the classroom training to folks in the communities that we serve. We have specific programs for opportunity youth, justice-involved individuals, women in solar, veterans in solar. Again, we really want to contribute to a well-rounded, a robust, and equitable workforce in the solar industry. We run a cohort model, so if you know job training organizations or folks interested in training, please do reach out. For any students, I know we have a student panel coming up after this. We partner with AmeriCorps to offer a year-long Solar Corps fellowship to provide training in climate change policy and equitable energy policy. And we also work with colleges and high schools to introduce solar, the importance of equity, and the importance of a just transition as well. Finally, this is a new program for us, relatively new, with the same mission, right? It's the same issue of technology access. How do we ensure that the folks who shoulder the brunt of our existing fossil fuel economy are first in line, really, to access these technologies like EVs, like the NEVs that was mentioned earlier during the slideshow, like e-bikes, like bike programs. And that's really our work right now. We're doing community outreach. There's programs available from the state rebates for income-qualified drivers who replace their cars. You can receive up to $20,000 in rebates from the state. We're administering that program. We're working with currently HACLA, the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, to extend access to EV chargers at their sites through a California Energy Commission grant. So always open to kind of work together and thinking about how we increase access to these clean mobility technologies. And that's it. I kept it short. Look forward to Q&A.
Our next speaker is Dr. Tony Michaels. Our keynote speaker was reluctant to describe the future in any specificity. I don't think Dr. Michaels will have that reluctance. Dr. Michaels is going to talk about the blue economy. He's involved with AltaSea, and he's talking also about energy from the ocean.
Thank you. Dangerous moment here. I'm not a person of few words, and so I used to be a professor for a short period, and I'd stand up. It'd be an invitation to talk for 50 minutes, then give you a test. But I know you got a full stomach, and we sit up here without lunch, smelling that wonderful food. So I'll do my best to be quick in this. I'm here on behalf of Terry Tamminen, who is the CEO of AltaSea. AltaSea is a relatively new initiative. It's been around for about 10 years in partnership of a variety of people in the Port of Los Angeles. AltaSea leases about a 30-acre property. It's that finger of land on the left side of the screen there, about 250,000 square feet of historic warehouses that kind of can't really be used for transport of goods anymore in this containerized shipping environment. And so what do you do with this space? And so the idea is to convert it into a combination of a traditional marine lab, an education and outreach center, and a blue economy incubator so that we can create the jobs of the future, so that we can create the technologies of the future. So I'm going to talk about that future thing that Gene warned you about. So guess what? I'm probably wrong in everything I say, but I'm directionally correct. I think that's how he would have introduced what I do. So AltaSea's vision is to have an ocean that can sustain future generations. You know, we have lived on the edge of this ocean and used it for resources for as long as we've had society. But how do we, in today's world, use this in a conscious way, in a way that respects the value that we have all come to have about the value of our oceans and our love of the oceans, but still use it to create value for us when it comes to how we provide energy, how we provide food, how we provision our society, how we transport materials across it, and how we deal with the changing climate. And AltaSea sort of has these three pieces that it brings together. The science, which is through partnerships with most of the universities in Southern California. What are the new things that are coming down the pike that don't yet exist that could really be helpful for us? How do those turn into businesses? Because most of these things actually become real because some group of people come together and make a company out of it that then sell it as products and innovations that help our lives. And then how do we change and empower the future generations to be able to take advantage of these things, to learn from what's been done, to become part of these companies? How do we create the workforce of the future that takes advantage of these things through this blue economy prism? And our focus clusters are really in three areas: regenerative aquaculture, renewable energy, and sort of underwater technologies. And the regenerative aquaculture thing is kind of a natural when you're next to the ocean. We already get a fair bit of food, and especially protein, out of the oceans. We just do it relatively inefficiently. We do it in other countries and then ship it into our, to our lives through our ports. And we wreck ocean ecosystems by harvesting them too hard, right? So we have an opportunity, but we have a real historical challenge that we have to address. And some of this has always been addressed by progressive sort of cultivation of farming, if you will. In my other life, I'm an organic farmer, and so I love the whole farming side of this thing. But agriculture is about 15% of our greenhouse gas emission. Okay, some of it through direct energy, some of it through sort of byproducts of how we manage fertilizers on land. And if we're going to solve our climate challenge, we've got to have lower carbon sources of food, and particularly protein, because some of the highest carbon footprint food sources are the proteins that we get from animals on land. Aquaculture has some of the lowest carbon footprint sources of food. And so we have a whole variety of partners that have come in that are in this aquaculture space, thinking about what the future of aquaculture could be. A lot of this is what's called extractive, which is a horrible word, but what it means is the things that go into the ocean and make a living just harvesting either nutrients or food out of the ocean. Oysters, mussels, clams, algae, and the other kinds of aquatic plants that can be really, really good food sources. We just don't do it here. And so these are companies that are inventing the next generation of technologies, putting them into companies, but also doing things that are kind of almost ready for prime time. We have a 100-acre federally permitted site offshore that is actually one of the largest aqua farms in the United States, mostly for mussels and kelp in sort of a combination. But the other thing is that we can bring some of these potentially previously harmful technologies for fed aquaculture, things you grow because you feed them, and move them onshore. And the initial transition of that is in the port, but things like shrimp that are extremely efficient at turning plants into high-quality animal tissue. But, you know, you just don't want to be doing this and wrecking mangroves, halfway around the world and then putting it into a ship and bringing it across the ocean. We can do that indoors here. Once that technology is ready, it can then be put in cities all over the country. And so those are the kinds of low energy, high protein, high nutrition food sources that our partners are working on. On the renewable energy side, some of this is the raw blue energy kind of thing. Wave energy is one of the big ones, offshore wind. How do you do sort of the fundamentals of anchoring offshore wind using novel robotic technologies to make some of these things right next to the coast rather than driving trucks through our cities to get them there. We also have, because it's Terry Tamminen, who was considered by some the father of the hydrogen highway when he was at California EPA, we do work with hydrogen. How do you clean up the local transport in the port? Think about more efficient logistics for moving things around that don't create some of these air quality issues, especially on the big freeways that move goods out of the port and into the rest of our country. And so we have a number of innovations that are sort of centralized there that might not be ocean-centric in their core, but are really important to getting the port clean, getting our transport of goods clean as we get these things out to the rest of the country. And we also do some work on energy storage and batteries. We have some novel things with hybrid vessels for energy source. So there's a lot of things on that renewable energy side that we're kind of doing the blue piece of that. And then the third area is really just core ocean technologies. There's a lot of things with automation, with measurement. National defense, a big part of our national defense mindset today is the Navy and the Marine Corps. What are the technologies that they need that sort of put instruments or equipment in harm's way rather than people in harm's way? And so we have that sort of component of the work we do. And when we look at this, we sort of also then reframe it to a series of goals. We want to mitigate and reverse climate change. So the clean energy, we do carbon sequestration work. There's sort of the restoration of the ocean. We talk about climate change as the result of these greenhouse gases, but the reality is those greenhouse gases are also acidifying the ocean. There are parts of the ocean today that oysters and mussels and clams can't make babies anymore because the solubility chemistry of the ocean isn't right for them to start that little baby shell. And these are things that we need to also address because we care about the oceans, the coral reefs, things like that. We see it through the prism of preserving the ocean for future generations. I don't want to be the cop-out. I have to drop my dollar bills off at the table on the way out here. But this is something that people care about very much. And we have to find ways to convert this knowledge and these ideas and these things into the tools that are then the training ground for the future generations of people that will use these things and do a better job, frankly, than we have. And so education, workforce training, blue jobs, those are the kinds of things that are also very important to the port, very important to us, and we make them very important to our tenants, the partners that we have in this process. And then, as I said, food security, having your food be local rather than global, having it be low carbon, have it be much more traceable and more nutritious and more provably safe. Those are also sort of the other prism that we want to do our work through. And then, as I said, education and workforce training is writ through this entire thing. We do a lot of stuff with sort of the K through 12 school environment. Kids love the ocean. Use the ocean excitement as part of a way to get kids interested in science, because it's a great vehicle for getting that excitement into STEM education. We do a lot of hands-on things, bring a lot of kids groups through, but we also force every single one of our tenants to think, who's going to do this job? If you have that company, who are you going to hire? Who's going to train those people to be versed enough in what you do that they are good employees without you having to start from scratch when you do that hiring? And so a lot of this is about how you put a workforce training program together that's knit together while you're creating the technology. Don't wait until there's a company out there that's going to put a job ad out. Let's get people well trained and well versed in these technologies as we go along. The core of what we do are these historic warehouses. We have about 240,000 square feet that's already under lease from the port. And they kind of don't quite look like this yet, but they're in renovation right now, and we're sort of cleaning them up. Some of this from the outside, but a lot of this from the inside. These are just big old warehouses going back 100 years. We're cleaning them up and making them a very flexible template for these companies, for education, for all the different activities that we do, the university research, to come in and use it, and essentially to have a fluid environment for shared ideas. And we used to say that we got a bunch of partners, but we want to add your logo to the graph as you become our partner too. Well, that works too well. The next time, the next wave of new people that get added to this graph, you're not even going to be able to see some of these. We have a lot of partners. There's a lot of excitement about this. We're an easy entry point for people to come and work with us. But all of these different groups setting up their own different activities in the context of our space are setting them up in the context of each other, so that they can all then naturally network with each other, network with the schools, network with the innovators, network with the financing. We have a bank that set up a little office in a shipping container right in the middle of this, so that we have all of the resources that each of these players needs for both what they do now and what they're going to do in the future. And it's a really exciting opportunity. If you want to add be our partner and add your name to this list, we welcome everybody, and we want this to get an ever more crowded figure. So that'll stop for now. We think it's a very exciting opportunity. It's emerging right at the very southern end of the area that you work on, right down in the Port of Los Angeles and San Pedro, Wilmington area. And it's something that hasn't really ever been done at this scale, and it's being done right here, right now. And it's exciting. So thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you all in the future.
Our final speaker is Janice Lin, and Janice is the founder and president of the Green Hydrogen Coalition, and hopefully she'll bring us up to date on the status of hydrogen generation at the Hyperion Outfall plant in El Segundo. Janice.
Thank you. I'm just going to slide that down. Can you hear me? It's always tough being the shortest speaker. The microphone never reaches. I'm just curious, by a show of hands, how many of you in the audience I'm standing on my tippy toes now so I can see over the top, would consider yourself really knowledgeable about hydrogen and green hydrogen? Just show of hands. All right, we got some extra. How many of you are, say, hydrogen curious? Well, show of hands. It's been in the news and, a lot of times. Wonderful. So I'm here for the experts and for the hydrogen curious to talk about the role of green hydrogen in achieving a more resilient, reliable energy future that's clean and just. And what I've loved about this conference, and I want to thank Jackie and David for inviting me here today, is everything we've talked about today is relevant for green hydrogen. And so I'm the founder and president of the GHC, and okay, there we go. So I'm going to go really quick. I'm going to try to condense a lot in 10 minutes, and I promised David I would keep it under 10 minutes. The GHC is an educational nonprofit, and we are focused on solving for alternative fuels to fossil fuels. And it's all about how do you scale green hydrogen and get it to being really low cost? Because if we can do that, we believe history will just take care of itself. Our approach from the beginning, since founding the GHC about 3.5 years ago, is to go big, go fast. We're all about scaling and looking at aggregating demand across sectors, even those pesky, hard-to-abate ones like aviation and shipping. Okay, so if there's one takeaway I want everyone, especially the hydrogen-curious folks, to know, and why I'm personally so excited about green hydrogen, it is absolutely key to ending our fossil fuel era. So deep decarbonization economy-wide. We can do it, and not just like in 50 years. We can do it now, right now, if all of us work together. Of course, and in the course of doing that, we're going to get rid of pollution, create jobs, even help invest in that needed water infrastructure. And what I'm going to share with you is we've done 3 years of analysis here in Southern California, including the South Bay, and share some of the really exciting findings. Okay, so another takeaway. Plants have made fuel from water and sun since like when the planet was started. So can we. This is called electrolytic green hydrogen. It's using renewable electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen's the energy carrier, and that hydrogen can be used either directly or to make derivative alternative fuels that can literally displace every type of fossil fuel we use today for resiliency, reliability. I live in the mountains. I just came out of a 12-day power outage. We had our propane generator cranking around the clock, and it doesn't have to be that way. Okay, first thing about hydrogen, and this is a little bit my own journey. It's an industrial commodity that's been used for like a really long time, like 100 years. About 70 million metric tons all over the world. We already have a lot of pipeline infrastructure, production infrastructure right here in Los Angeles, including, it says 17 miles, I think it's going up to 30 miles of hydrogen pipeline, safely operated. The issue is all the hydrogen that's used to date for like oil refining, for producing fertilizer, ammonia, it's all been made from fossil fuels, and it doesn't have to be that way. We can make the hydrogen from renewable sources. Okay, I'm going to take you through a couple of projects that are relevant for today, some innovative. The first one I want to talk about is just announced by Pacific Gas and Electric. It's a community-scale microgrid in Calistoga that combines electrolytic hydrogen, so making green hydrogen from renewable electricity and water, storing it, and then turning it back to electricity with a fuel cell. They can do this and take about, 2,000 homes offline for at least 2 days or more. More storage, more duration. That is a great 100% renewable alternative to that propane generator I just talked about a second ago. Another example, this is happening all over the world. I could do like a whole hour talk of different projects happening. Australia, this was in the New York Times literally last week. Fortescue Future Industries is one of the largest mining companies in the world. Announced a deal with BP, and they are producing a humongous electrolytic green hydrogen facility in Western Australia. 10 million solar panels, 17,000 wind turbines. I think it's about 26 gigawatts of capacity, and what it's going to do is to produce green hydrogen so Fortescue can reduce their diesel use by 30%. This is a company that uses 1 billion liters of diesel every year. Think about that. What is a billion? 333 million are now going to be not combusted, and we're going to be using green hydrogen instead. How cool is that? Another project. This was announced, I want to say last year. This is an AES, Air Products project. It's one of the largest green hydrogen production projects announced in the U.S. It's in North Texas, so I want to get the competitive California juices going. We have a lot of renewable electricity here and a lot of renewable resources, but this is big. 1.4 gigawatts of wind and solar is going to produce 200 metric tons per day of green hydrogen. This is huge. It's going to create thousands of jobs. One of the great applications of green hydrogen, I want to bring it back to resiliency, is the ability to take our abundant, very low-cost wind and solar production, split water, and turn it into a stored usable fuel for later. What I'm showing here on the left, and I know Lorenzo could probably give like a whole day-long thesis about this, is the amount of curtailment that we have in California. The different colored bars are over the years. As we get more current, there's more and more curtailment. This is sad. This is an amazing resource that instead of wasting it, we could be turning it into green hydrogen and using it for later. So what you see on the right is the production profile of our renewable energy under a 100% renewable scenario. We got lots of excess generation. I don't know if I have a pointer here. The blue bars in the middle is when we have more generation. The gray is when we have not enough. When we get to 100% renewable energy in the power sector, we will have days, sequential days where there's just not enough wind and solar, and that's even going to happen in the spring and summer. What are we going to do? We need to generate electricity because we can't afford to have any of those power outages. We heard from Jean earlier, that's the foundation. Many entities, EDF, the LA 100 study, LADWP's long-term energy plan, has said, hey, to get to 100%, we will need this thing called clean, firm, dispatchable power. That can be supplied by green hydrogen. If we don't have some alternative fuel, we will have to continue to combust natural gas. That's a future that we don't support. Okay, which brings me to actually the biggest green hydrogen projects in North America. I talked about Australia. There's bunches of them going on all over the world. But indeed, the largest green hydrogen project under development in North America today is the conversion of a very large 1,800 megawatt coal plant to a 100% hydrogen turbine. That project's going to be commissioned in the summer of 2025 on a 30% green hydrogen blend going all the way up to 100%. And I raise this project because it's big, it's scalable, and a lot of the beneficiaries are here, and I just got my 2-minute warning. So I'm just going to wrap up by just sharing with you high-level results of our 3 years of study here in the South Bay in Southern California of what the benefits are of green hydrogen. We talked about community benefits. I'm happy to report, for those of you who are interested, we're releasing literally today the 130-page report summarizing all these amazing findings. And on March 28th, you can tune into a free webinar that's about an hour and a half long to hear directly from the experts. Key finding 1, green hydrogen at scale can even be cheaper than fossil fuels. This is very, very exciting news. 2, in the course of creating that green hydrogen economy, we will create tens of thousands of new jobs, more jobs than the oil and gas industry employs today in California. And 3, green hydrogen, when used to displace lots of fossil fuels, will result in very significant air quality improvements and literally saving hundreds, if not thousands, of lives, so improving the quality of health. We don't really have time to go into all the details, but suffice to say, thanks to the federal government and the recently enacted production tax credits, we believe that we can deliver green hydrogen at under $1 per kilogram here in South Bay. That's significant because a kilogram of hydrogen is about equivalent to like a gallon of diesel. Now, if we can achieve that, boy, think about all those diesel trucks that are going to switch over to hydrogen-fueled trucks. Secondly, there's a lot of talk about water, and I've been talking about making hydrogen from water. We are in a big drought. We're still in a drought, floods notwithstanding. And what we did was we worked with Pacific Northwest National Labs that did what I think is the nation's first regional water study that said, what are the sources of water? We'd rather not use the potable water, and what we found was that there's more than enough wastewater that can be treated to make green hydrogen. So the needed volume of water for the green hydrogen vision we came up are the blue bars on the right. The green bars on the left are the absolute sources of wastewater. So you can see the relative difference. There's more than enough wastewater. But here's the great secret. The water contribution to green hydrogen production, if it's like, 70 cents a kilogram, the cost of the water part is under a nickel. That means that we can leverage these green hydrogen developers and use them to bring capital and invest in the needed wastewater treatment infrastructure. That's a great synergistic effect because we know we have to invest in this sector. Earlier this morning, you guys talked about how important that value proposition and the financing. I say make the hydrogen developers pay for that wastewater infrastructure, not consumers. Finally, my last slide. The air quality benefits were profound. We worked with University of California, Irvine, and looked at the air quality improvements. That blue, dark blue, hovering there over the South Bay and Los Angeles, is the net change by 2045 of getting rid of a whole lot of fossil fuel use and replacing it with very commercially viable and reasonable scenarios of green hydrogen use. And it results in a lot fewer deaths, fewer work days, higher productivity. In fact, we think the quantification of the health benefits pays for this ecosystem alone. Okay, finally, this was a condensed 10-minute thing. I know my time is up. I hope I've sparked your interest. I would like all of you to, my goal is to encourage all the hydrogen-curious folks in this room to become green hydrogen active. We look forward to working with you. We got a ton of free resources. You can sign up for our newsletter. And I'd like to invite everybody to attend our annual event, which is in December, right here in Long Beach at the Hotel Maya. So thank you so much.
Well, I think our speakers have probably generated more questions than answers, but it was certainly educational. And we have time for questions, correct? From the audience? Question? Microphone.
Hi. Go ahead, please. All right. I'm Leslie Graham from Interstate Renewable Energy Council. We partner with Grid Alternatives. We don't have the workforce for all this. How are we going to change the curriculum in K through 12 to educate kids, build awareness that the trades and clean energy careers are their best options?
Alex, do you want to take that? Alex?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, especially with elementary, middle schools, it's really sparking that inspiration, which I think is improving over time as we become more and more aware of the climate crisis. You're seeing a lot more people activated to want to work in this field. I could speak to the work that we do. We partner with all local JTOs, work source centers, and our goal really is to educate folks of the career pathways available to them in this growing field. It's nowhere near where it needs to be, I would say. I think, like you mentioned, planting the seed at a young age is an important first step to let folks know that this is a reasonable career path. But I would say that the workforce development infrastructure is there, especially in Southern California and in this region. It's a really robust job training network here, community college, public school network that I think can be utilized to really begin to train the workforce we need and the numbers we need. But like you said, I think it takes investment. It takes like an intentional effort to do that.
I think I want to emphasize the community college piece of this because we've had really good luck. Helping the community colleges create certificate programs that are kind of early entryway kinds of programs, and helping find actually resources because it is a chicken and the egg. How do you create this program when you don't yet know how big the demand is going to be? but you know you're going to find out that demand was much bigger than you thought when you actually need those people to be trained to take the jobs. So a community college is a very good way to create that through certificate programs that can then expand in size to become degree programs, which can then expand in size beyond that.
And can I ask you, Director?
Are you going next?
I'll go ahead.
Do I
I'm
have time
sorry.
to chime in on this?
Go
or
ahead.
you want to cut it off?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a big challenge. There is a $8 billion RFP issued by the Department of Energy and Workforce Development. This is just for clean and green hydrogen hubs. That response is due on April 7th, so a lot of people are real busy on that. But a huge part of that is workforce development. I'm so thrilled that we have a table of young people here. What I'm finding is that I'm at the age now where many of my friends have children and they're talking to me about their future career. And so we're starting and launching an educational effort also focused at young people to leverage digital media, because from our standpoint, a lot of change happens like one person at a time, right? So anyway, if anyone's interested to work on that with us, let me know.
And I'd like to add just one thing to that. You've heard mention today of community resilience centers, the idea of creating little microgrids on facilities. Well, it turns out that school multipurpose rooms could be the ideal places for creating community resilience centers. So if at a school facility you now have solar panels and battery storage system and a microgrid control system, you've also got an educational device for students in that school to actually learn about how these things function. So it's a side benefit you get from creating a resilience center on a school.
And I'd like to ask you to direct your question to an individual so we can.
My name is Bailey Wong. I'm a student at Cal Poly Pomona, and I have a question about green hydrogen. So I've only heard of green hydrogen in the form of vehicles. Instead of fossil fuels or gasoline or something like that, diesel. I want to know what infrastructure changes we need to make in order to have it as an electricity source or something like that.
That is a great question. Can I take that one? You can fill in too. So green hydrogen, to get to, the key is to get it, you need to have a lot of it, right? Because we use a lot of fossil fuels today. And it has to be supply certainty, and it has to be delivered at a low price point. If there's not visibility in that, we're not going to be able to get the heavy-duty fleet operators, the trucks, to convert, or power plants. You can actually, one thing that I learned in my journey is that virtually every power plant today can already combust a blend of natural gas and zero carbon green hydrogen. It's all about the infrastructure. How do you get the mass scale, low cost green hydrogen to users that want to use it at large scale? And the infrastructure, I mean, look at other sectors. We've got the oil sector, the gas sector. We have existing pipelines. We have storage facilities. None of that exists for green hydrogen today. And the ability to put that infrastructure in as fast as possible will help us, a large segment of various consumers across sectors, use that hydrogen and adopt more quickly. And so there's, if you'd like, I'd love to talk to you about that more if you're interested.
Panelists, thank you, panelists, and thank you, Kevin, for that very informative discussion. Let's give them a round of applause.